Hello, hello. Welcome to our webinar, Climate Change and the Great Lakes with Tony Briscoe. As you enter our space, please share some information about yourself in the chat box. We'd love to know your name, where you're based, and a global issue that you're passionate about. My name is Joya Mukherjee. I'm joining you from my apartment in Chicago. And a global issue that I'm passionate about is the welfare of children, especially in the face of conflict or poverty. I'm joined by my colleague, Fareed Mustofi. Fareed, would you like to say hello?
I would love to, yes, and the question is now in the chat. My name is Fareed Mustofi, and I'm part of the education team here at the Pulitzer Center. I'm based in Washington, D.C., but from Columbus, Ohio, and an issue that I am passionate about right now is migration, and the many reasons that people are migrating right now. Can I turn it over to our special guest?
Of
Can you share
course.
with us, Tony, where are you today, and what's an issue that you're passionate about?
Absolutely. I'm broadcasting from my home in Oak Park, just outside of Chicago. And I guess I would say that an issue that I'm most passionate about, just going along with the theme of the series, is just how climate change is affecting water availability, quality, and how that pans out across communities in the Great Lakes region. We all already know that essentially there are certain communities that are right alongside the world's largest system of fresh water that have been essentially denied access either through water degradation or other means, from having a chance to have access to clean water. So that's something I really care deeply about and think should be chronicled more.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tony. Fareed, can you share some of the chats with us? We'd love to get to know who we are with today.
Thank you. Stephanie's joining us from St. Louis, Missouri, and Janie from outside of Chicago. And Janie actually was able to have Tony visit her class and is very excited about engaging with him again. Thanks for joining us, Janie. Marion's here from Denver, Colorado, and Leah from Minneapolis. Some of the issues I'm seeing in the chat here, global gender issues, is important to the community here. Marion writes, passionate about climate warming. Lynn is joining us from St. Paul. Dawn, thank you for sharing your pronouns, and also joining us from NYC today, reminding us that where she is right now, the land is claimed by the Lenape. If in a moment, once we start, I can also share a resource in our chat where we can all check and acknowledge the land that we are on right now and who that land belonged to. And Dawn is mentioning passion about racial and environmental justice. We have some St. Paul, what up? What up, Leah? And Lynn joining us from, maybe that's Minneapolis, MPLS. I love that. David, welcome. Working with remote First Nations communities in the far northern Ontario area. Kim, welcome from Columbus, Ohio. And Kim is passionate about veganism, plant-based living,
Great,
for climate change.
Great, thank you so much for sharing, Fareed. We are so excited to have you all with us, and we hope that you find this useful and engage as much as possible. So I'd like to talk about how we're going to spend the next hour of our time together. We'll begin by discussing the Pulitzer Center. We'll talk about the organization's mission, as well as the resources and programs we provide for students and teachers. Then we'll go into our resources for Great Lakes High Stakes, which is the reporting project we're going to be talking about today. This will include walking through a lesson plan aligned with the reporting. Then we'll go straight into our presentation with our journalist, Tony Briscoe, which will be concluded by a Q&A section where we will try to answer as many of the submitted questions as we can. And then we'll close today with some thoughts about the Connected Coastlines Initiative, information on upcoming webinars, and ways for us to stay connected, and a final survey so we can receive some feedback on your experience today and what you're hoping to get from us in the future. Now, I know many of us are probably very familiar with Zoom by this point, but I'd love to talk about how we're going to be using this platform today. So you'll notice that your video is off and your microphone is muted. It will remain off throughout the duration of this presentation, there are going to be ways for you to engage. That includes the Q&A box and the chat box. So the Q&A box is a place where you can submit questions throughout the presentation. You don't need to wait until the Q&A portion of the event. As questions arise for you, please type them into the Q&A box, which I believe is located at the bottom of your window. We'll collect those questions and we'll answer them at the allotted time. Another way for you to participate today is our chat box. Our chat box is a place where you can share your responses or reflections with everyone. Many of you already have. We want to make sure that your messages are being read by everybody. So make sure you select all panelists and attendees, which is this blue button right here. I'd also like to say that I know that many of us have a lot of Zoom stamina, but I want to acknowledge that it is challenging to sit for an entire hour and some change with full attention. So if you are home, especially if this is the end of your day, please feel free to take the breaks that you need, hopefully with a yummy snack, and come join us back when you are ready. We also want to acknowledge that this is a challenging and surreal time for many of us, a surreal year really, and the Pulsar Center wants to be a support to you and your students. We would love to hear from you if you have questions, concerns, or ways that we can support you and your students as you endeavor to learn and teach from home. So now that we spent a couple of minutes together, what is a Pulsar Center? The Pulsar Center is a journalism organization. We work with journalists that cover underreported stories around the world. Underreported stories refer to stories that are not necessarily dominating the headlines, but are still significant stories, often covering global and systemic issues and need to be told. The Pulsar Center supports journalists who cover these stories by providing funding for their reporting projects. That funding either allows them to travel to cover stories or gives them more time so they can cover their stories more fully and more deeply. Here are some of the topics journalists investigate with Pulsar Center grants. You'll notice that these topics represent a rich range of issues. If you spot an issue that resonates with you, I encourage you to visit the reporting page of our website and review our growing collection of news stories. Here are just some of the places that our stories have been published. You'll probably notice an outlet that you're familiar with. We also collaborate with many local reporting outlets. Now, once journalists publish their story, our work, and most likely their work does not end, we like to bring these stories to the public and continue the conversation. The Education Department's mission is to cultivate a more curious, informed, empathetic, and engaged public by connecting students and teachers with underreported global news stories and the journalists who cover them. We uphold this mission by providing a variety of programs and resources to educators and students. Beyond our growing collection of articles, photos, and videos on underreported issues, we have hundreds of lesson plans developed by Pulsar Center staff and teaching partners available on our lesson builder. We also facilitate opportunities for students and teachers to connect with journalists through our virtual visits and webinars. We host workshops for students and teachers and launch 2 seasonal writing contests for students annually. One of our greatest resources is our lesson builder. Our lesson builder holds a rich collection of lesson plans, unit plans, and printable lessons. Our lessons explore news stories, examine global issues, practice critical thinking, literacy, and reporting skills, and challenge students to make connections and take action. You can visit our Pulsar Center lesson builder at pulsarcenter.org/builder. Now, if environment and climate change is really your space that resonates with you, your scholastic curiosity, the Pulsar Center has over 150 lessons that explore the global impact of climate change. You can find these lessons on our lesson builder, and if you choose the environment and climate change issue on our search engine, you'll be able to refine your search and find lesson plans that suit your needs in the classroom. Now, the Pulsar Center offers 2 unique ways for classrooms to engage with journalists. The first is our virtual journalist visits. Teachers that are interested in hosting a journalist in their classroom can contact us at education@pulitzer-center.org to arrange for one of our grantees, like Tony Briscoe, to speak with their students. In the past, journalists have discussed the content of their reporting, the countries that they visited, their career path, or even their storytelling process. If this is something that interests you, we encourage you to reach out and schedule your visit. Another unique way to connect with journalists is by attending any of our webinars. The Education Department has created teacher-facing and student-facing webinars to support students who are learning from home. These two upcoming webinars might interest you. We have one coming up on Thursday, September 24th. The Migrant Experience, a Reporting Fellow Virtual Film Festival, will feature stories of migration and experiences of place. And our student-facing webinar is with Brittany Gibson. She's going to lead a webinar for students on voter suppression and disenfranchisement in US elections and how people are fighting against it. If either of these or both of them are interesting to you, go ahead to pulitzer-center.org/events and register. Now, we launched two writing contests for students annually, a fall writing contest and a spring writing contest. Our fall contest, Local Letters for Global Change, is officially in full swing. This is a persuasive letter writing contest for all grade levels. Students find a news story that explores an issue that they are passionate about, and then the student considers how the issue affects their own community and writes a one-page letter to their local representative in advocating for change. The deadline for this is Friday, November 13th. And if you visit our local letters page, you can find all the workshop materials if you're interested in holding this workshop in your classroom. If you're interested in having a Pulitzer Center staff member host or run the workshop in your classroom, please reach out to us at education@pulitzer-center.org. Now, I've thrown a lot of information at you. I'm not quite finished yet, but it's been quite a bit. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what is exciting or useful for you. So thank you, Fareed, for launching the poll. Which of these resources are exciting for you? Is that our open access news resources, our lesson plans, virtual journalist visits, webinars, or student contests? You can, of course, choose as many as you'd like, but I'd love to get to know a little bit more about what is interesting for you. So we'll let it run for about 5 more seconds, maybe 6. Let's do 6. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, 1. Let's close this poll. Great. So it looks like people are really interested in lesson plans, wonderful, and our open access news resources. People also seem to be really interested in journalist visits. We'd love to facilitate those for you. Our webinars are coming up, and our schedule is pretty robust, so we hope to see you as well. And student contest comes in as well. Thank you so much for sharing. So one of the ways that we can get people to really start caring about the climate and the environment is to talk about the way it impacts people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through this lesson plan that really captures that aspect of the reporting process. I'm going to talk about the way it speaks to the reporting, and we'll walk through the lesson plan itself. So Climate Change in the Great Lakes, Identity and Home is a lesson plan for middle school and high school students. Students explore the effects of climate change on identities and homes and livelihoods of communities living in the Great Lakes region. By the end of the lesson, we want students to be able to describe how climate change is affecting Lake Superior and Lake Huron, and be able to summarize and evaluate the role of the lake, the role that the lake has in supporting the livelihood and identities of the surrounding communities. The communities that are represented in this particular lesson plan are the First Nation tribes, commercial and sports fishermen, homeowners near Lake Huron, and communities surrounding Lake Huron. So let's walk through this lesson plan. We begin the lesson by asking students to reflect on their notions of home and how their home influences their sense of self, their family, and their community. Then we introduce the text. We discuss the impact of climate change on our Great Lakes and the communities surrounding the lakes. The 2 articles from the reporting project listed here have accompanying questions to support a deep reading of each text. Then students are provided with a graphic organizer that helps them track the impact of climate change on different community groups surrounding the lake. The lesson ends with some discussion prompts that support a deep reflection and an opportunity for students to consider how they might take action. Extension activities include 2 writing prompts and an opportunity to create a local campaign in favor of preserving the lakes. If you're interested in using this tool, visit our lesson builder to see the plan and download the graphic organizer. So let's move on to our headliner. For Reed, I'm actually going to ask you to read this bio.
Great. Our guest today is Tony Briscoe, a reporter for ProPublica Illinois, who previously worked at the Chicago Tribune as an environmental reporter, writing extensively about issues facing the Great Lakes and the impacts of climate change on the Midwest. You can read a little bit more about Tony and his award-winning career in this slide, which will be shared with you. I'm also going to put his bio into the chat, but I think without further ado here, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Tony, to take us into your reporting process. Can we all welcome Tony with an enormous virtual applause in the chat? And maybe Joy and I can applaud in person.
Thank you guys so much. It's really an honor to be here, and I just am really appreciative of the Pulitzer Center for finding this as a worthwhile project and something worth delving into and letting people know about. It's more than just a regional issue. It's really something that we as a country and 2 countries really, I mean, and globally should be looking into is the Great Lakes. And I guess a little bit about me before we go into this. I mean, I grew up in the Detroit area and for most of my life, and it just was really incredible that I didn't have this kind of sense of connectedness to the lake. I started off my career as a breaking news reporter at the Detroit News, moved over to Chicago in 2014, where I was a reporter for the Chicago Tribune. And it wasn't until I got there that I started kind of realizing the impact and what a tremendous resource the Great Lakes were. I mean, this is it almost wrote itself in terms of what does this resource mean from a region. And so that's essentially how we pitched it when we found out that the Pulitzer Center was offering this Connected Coastline grants to chronicle how communities are coastline communities are changing with climate change and how their lives are changing. We just started off, why should the nation care? I mean, and I think that we sometimes take it for granted, the folks who live around here. I mean, this is the largest system of fresh water on the planet. This is 20% of the world's fresh water above ground. I mean, if you look at Lake Superior itself, I mean, if you take all the water in Lake Superior and spilled it over North and South America, it could cover both continents in 1 foot of water. I mean, this is a tremendous amount of resource that, I mean, in this age of, water availability and scarcity in some places, it's just, it's incredible. So we're dealing with fresh water here, which is a big deal. It's, I don't think a lot of people realize that this is the longest shoreline in the mainland United States. Only Alaska has a longer coastline. There's a $7 billion fishing industry, which has declined, unfortunately, due to invasive species. And I'm sure temperature rise has had a hand in that as well. And a very robust shipping industry with, the St. Lawrence Seaway and shipping going in through there. And then also through the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, up through the Port of Chicago. So the way that we relate and the amount of different industries and things that are dependent on the Great Lakes are just tremendous. And while each of them are seeing some of the same threats posed by climate change, it's to a different degree just because of just subtle differences, their depth, their shape, their configuration and location. And I think that you can really get a sense of it when you look at this map, which, I mean, really is only showing depth, but I mean, that's, kind of an indicator of temperature. And so you get an idea of, how, something as simple as temperature rise can influence these lakes in different ways based on their environment, their surroundings, Is it more urban, rural? I mean, it's just a diversity of communities that we're talking about here. And so these were the stories that we essentially pitched. We found out and we took the unique characteristics of these communities and the watersheds and the lakes. My colleagues actually over at the Tribune used to say I talked about the lakes a little bit like I would talk about someone talks about their children, but they are really that unique. It's just you know, if you start to go through them and you get these superlatives and you see that that's what makes it special. So for example, you have Lake Erie, which is the southernmost, the warmest, and the shallowest lake. But that's what makes it such a tremendous fishing ground. It's, you know, you have this area that essentially, some scientists describe it almost as like a little pond, like a farm pond, to where, you know, it's a very rural area around it. And so when you have something such as, you know, manure or fertilizer running in through the Maumee River and dumping into the western shallow end of the lake, it causes this kind of explosion of algae and bacteria, which, I mean, outwardly sounds a little bit disgusting, but at the same time, it's what, I mean, that is the base of the food chain for the aquatic system there. And so when you think about it, it's like 2% of the water in the Great Lakes are in Lake Erie, but it has 50% of the fish. And you get this idea, it's like, wow, that's, I mean, vice versa, if you're talking about Lake Superior, it has 50% of the Great Lakes water and only 2% of the fish. So I mean, this is why people go, it's an like globally, people know Lake Erie when it comes to fishing. But at the same time, you know, it's the most populous. Like you have big cities surrounding it. You have Toledo, you have Cleveland. And when you're talking about algae blooms and bacteria, that obviously is something that's somewhat of a problem when you're talking about filtering water. You have 11 million people that are dependent on this as their water source. And in a world where things are getting warmer and more heavier rainfall is sweeping more manure and sewer into these waterways, it's making a tremendous problem. We're seeing these algae blooms grow at bigger magnitudes. So that's kind of the pitch that an angle that we decided to take there. Lake Huron is a really interesting case. You know, this was my first time to Lake Huron, and you know, it's actually one big lake with Lake Michigan because water goes back and forth between both lakes, and so they share the same water level. And you can see just based in the upper left-hand corner, we had a really long stretch. I want to say some 15 odd years where it was just really like, you know, drought-like conditions, El Nino. And you had this receding water levels, and people were wondering, is it ever going to get higher? And then you have 6 feet of water level rise, nearly 6 feet of water level rise from 2013 when it bottomed out historic lows to like 2019. And so, you know, while we could have done the same story with Lake Michigan, what makes Lake Huron so special is that this is, you know, the lake with the most islands. It has 30,000 of the 35,000 islands here. And what better way to tell the story of fluctuating lake levels or rising or falling water levels than an island where you need, I mean, that's the difference between you can get off the island is, you know, can I launch my boat? Is it high and dry? Is my boathouse getting ready to sweep away? And we actually did see a boathouse swept away when we went up to this area, the Lachino Islands. And it's also home to the First Nations and the largest freshwater island in the world in Manitoulin Island. So that is how we address that one. Lake Superior is probably one of the most well-known lakes. I mean, everyone says biggest, coldest, deepest, and it's the northernmost lake. So you go up to these communities and they speak with pride about, you know, just being the Northland and winter recreation. These are areas where people love to get out on the ice and go ice fishing and do dog sled racings on, you know, across the bay. And there's even these kind of, you know, odd sports where people take, you know, stock cars and they drive on the ice and they have these races. And it's really just another kind of culture. But, you know, as we're seeing with climate change, you know, northern areas are warming a lot faster than, you know, southern areas. It's really pronounced. And so some of these long-standing traditions are going by the wayside, unfortunately. when the pandemic hit, we were just about to go to Lake Ontario, which I won't spend too much time on this, but it's the gateway to the ocean. It's the easternmost lake. It's the smallest by size, but it's still very deep. And so our question with Lake Ontario was, in a world where, like, all the Great Lakes except for Lake Michigan and Huron, which see the greatest deviation from low to high, um, they all broke records in 2019 in terms of high water levels. And so in this scenario where Lake Ontario, like Lake Superior, is regulated, where they can hold more water back or let more water go, which interest do you kind of, take? Because you can hold water back to allow for ships to come through, but then you're flooding the lake. If you let too much water go, some ships might not be able to come up through the St. Lawrence Seaway because they can't overpower the current. So that was going to be the case. Hopefully we could still get to that. Lake Michigan, I'm really looking forward to. We were going to save that one for last. Lake Michigan is the deadliest lake. It is the lake where you see a lot of shipwrecks, and just based on its configuration, it's very long from north to south. And so you can have these, when you get this southerly wind that it's kind of known for, you have this wave that builds up towards the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, all the way down to Indiana. You get these big 25, 30-foot waves crashing down towards the dunes. And so in a world where you have these intensifying storms, we were curious, how that would play out in these highly developed areas like Chicago, like Milwaukee, some of the cities in Western Michigan on the southern tip, just because, I think a lot of people don't realize the history of some of these places in terms of where the natural shoreline was. So you have these kind of two competing forces and intensifying storms that are battering some of these areas. And then where was the original shoreline? For Chicago, I don't think a lot of people realize that that was Michigan Avenue. Anything east of Michigan Avenue, Grant Park, Millennium Park, a lot of those things is all Lakeville. That's all artificial land. And so people wonder sometimes why the lakefront road that's kind of known for, like, so Lakeshore Drive floods chronically, but it's like, well, that would have been that would have been the lake you're talking about a couple hundred years ago. So that was kind of looking at, well, how are you having these two kind of competing interests, and with intensifying storms, is Lake Michigan kind of reclaiming what's hers? So it's without having like this science background, it was a lot of people are like, well, how did you kind of study? How did you research? How did you go through these kind of things? And it's just like, I really took it as a challenge to go through with a clean mind, just point by point. And so there were certain things, like I knew that Lake Erie, it's going to be straightforward, but it really wasn't. I knew that harmful algae blooms, HABs, right there, was something that we wanted to write about. And I think that it was well documented by the local papers and such, the toxins that were produced by the bacteria that dominates the algae bloom, and how that led to the Toledo water crisis, where for 3 days the city said, do not drink the water. This has breached the water intakes. But, I wanted to kind of expand beyond that and look at it in all aspects. And I was looking at what's known as hypoxia, or dead zone. So once all of this algae, dies, it rots at the bottom of the lake, and it sucks up all this oxygen. And so they had this dead zone or hypoxia tracker. And at first I was thinking, well, it's because this big dead zone that you can kind of see in the upper graphic, it takes up this area that's about the size of Connecticut in the middle of the lake. And it's like, oh, well, that makes sense that they would want to track this, because with, little oxygen, this is the greatest fishing ground, right? So you got to know where the fish can survive and where they can't, because fish need oxygen as well. Well, you go through the process and you kind of look back and you say, well, it's kind of, people were reporting, yellow and brown water when, this dead zone water would be washed into the intakes. So you had discoloration because there was this chemical reaction going on where it would pull out heavy metals from the lake bed. And it turned out to be manganese. Then you had this lowering of pH. And it turns out that, this wasn't in response, even though it could be used for the fishing industry, but it was more so as a health consequence that people need to study this. And remember, Lake Erie is is the area that the most people depend on water for. It's more than 11 million people rely on Lake Erie for water. So really big deal. And really is a subject that I hadn't seen that many people writing on, was how does iron and manganese being pulled out of this, especially manganese, which at certain levels can be a potent neurotoxin. And then also like looking at lowered pH, going through the intakes and going through the water treatment process. You can see I wrote in a question mark, lead. Is that contributing to lead poisoning? Is acidified water corroding pipelines? And the answer is, to a small extent, they did believe, if they're not treating it correctly, that it was. And so it ended up being a really big deal just by kind of working through the process. Beyond that, I mean, I understand that science is a really big part of this, and it is the crux of what we're doing, is looking at research and looking at better explaining things. But I always try and look at things also through the lens of just telling a story. That's really how you're going to hook students, how you're going to hook an audience, is to try and tell things cinematically. And for the longest time, I wasn't able to go to these areas. I was one of the folks that was like, okay, I'm reading about this from afar. Why should I care? And what I really strove to do with all these stories is take people to that place, and just really hit on, what the essence of a story is. It's when a character meets a complicated situation that they must solve through action. I mean, what better way to describe climate change is something that all these communities are taking action to adjust their lives to. My uncle used to always say that life is an interesting process for complicated people, and yet here we are. It's like, you have all these kind of piecemeal projects going on, and all these communities scrambling to overcome these complications that we've created. And so that's what it really is about, is this special relationship between people and place. And so we found ourselves at these kind of areas. Like this is in our Lake Superior project. This was just off of Bayfield, looking towards Madeline Island. This is an ice road, and so people historically drove across this ice road, and a lot of people who were coming from out of town would drive to Madeline Island. I mean, and they didn't even realize that this wasn't like an actual road. This is just sheer ice that would freeze over solid. And a local family there would plow the road, and they would measure and see how thick it is to make sure it was safe. And it became, that's how people got on and off the island. That's how the garbage truck would get to the side of the island to pick up all the garbage. And we went through the archive clips to kind of look at like, well, how well was it used? What's happened on this ice road? And like people would move houses. This was an example in the 70s where a semi truck, I mean, they really tested the might of this ice. A semi truck brought a 2-story house over to the island. And unfortunately, in this case, it ended up falling through. I mean, that really kind of tested the limits. Luckily, no one was hurt in that, but it really goes to show you kind of almost the overconfidence that people had in the ice year in, year out being so strong. But when we got to to the Madeline Island area, this is what we saw. It was one of the warmest years on record. The ferry was still running. This was the coldest part of the year, and we had to take the ferry. And this ferry had 150 years, or more than 100 years for sure, of records in terms of not this ferry in particular, but the harbor, in terms of when the season opened and when it closed, which was a really good indication of when the ice locked up. And it was just really crazy to kind of see, well, how many times has this happened? And it only had happened a few times that the ferry would run all year round, and that you would it had all happened recently too. I mean, I want to say all in the last 10 or 20 years that that the ferry would even run. And so the garbage truck now, instead of driving across the ice road, was loading up on the back of the ferry to collect garbage. And it's just subtle differences, in terms of how people and there are people who stay on the island all year round, are changing their lifestyles. This is another example of just trying to kind of take people to that place. I mean, this is what 6 feet of lake level rise looks like in the Les Cheneaux Islands area. This was an archipelago of 36 islands just off the southern end of the upper peninsula in Michigan. And this is a boating community where of those 36 islands, you can take roads to 2. Everywhere else, you have to get on and off with a boat. And when your boathouses are looking like this and your docks are plundered and underwater, you can imagine what kind of a toll it takes and how much your life it changes when you can't get to certain places. Just it's incredible to kind of think about, and also to put it in perspective. I mean, you think about sea level rise, right? I mean, that's a huge topic. Like for sea level rise, you have 6 feet around that. That's kind of like the floor. Over 100 years. This is 6 feet that we're talking about in 6.5. That's a lot of water. I mean, I know for sure. Like, I mean, we're talking both Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, but Lake Michigan itself is the size of West Virginia. I mean, that's a lot of water that we're talking about in terms of just raising up 6 feet across such a vast area. And you know, I really just do owe a bit of credit to all the folks who took the time to talk to us. I mean, because really we're conveying these stories through them. This is not my story, it's the communities. And so in many cases, I'm going to these communities for the first time, and I'm depending on the generosity of people to kind of tell me and entrust in me their stories that I'm kind of conveying to you all. I mean, you have the chief of a First Nations tribe on Manitoulin Island, whose people historically had been able to reliably fish off the waters there. And because of invasive species and climate change and different changes, now they're pushing fish farming, where they have fish in pens. And is that the future? Look at how much things have changed. You have the mayor of Toledo in the hard hat down there, who, you know, as much as he can, is drinking tap water when he goes out in public to ensure people that the water is safe to drink. You have fishermen in Lake Erie who, because of these dead zones, are trying to fish in different areas because they don't know where the fish are going to be. The owner of Dollar Island over there, who's, I mean, this is as high as he's seen it since the 80s, which were the all-time records. And then, you know, just the people who just live there on a day-by-day basis, which I feel like a lot of us are, you know, just in our communities. Just imagine being paranoid to drink your own tap water. Or in this young woman's case, she would drive 4 hours to go to the beach. She has a beach like 10 minutes from her home in Lake Erie over in Toledo, but yet it's really not a beach scene there. She drives up to Lake Huron to go to the beach because, you know, in certain cases in the middle of the summer, these algae blooms, you know, they can be a skin irritant. So just imagine having this resource that you're unable to use. And then I try as much as I can to make characters out of, I guess, the organisms that can't talk. And so I think that people's eyes kind of glaze over when you talk about algae or bacteria and harmful algae, quote unquote. I mean, this is actually cyanobacteria. And it's the bacteria that dominates and creates that really loud, incredible Hulk green that you see in Lake Erie. And, you know, I always try and add these graphs that really just put things in perspective in plain terms on why you should care and why these organisms, in many cases, is like extraordinary. It's like something out of a movie. I remember coming across a graphic and it put in perspective how deadly is the toxin that's produced by the cyanobacteria that dominates this bloom. And I was seeing things like ricin, cyanide, antifreeze. This is more deadly than that, and it's in the water. It's surrounding the water intake that you drink. I think that a lot of people, even if you don't live in the area, would be like, "Oh my gosh, this is what's in our water." And not only that, but it's important to put in perspective. As I said, this is happening not only in Lake Erie, even though that's the most pronounced example. This is happening off of the Apostle Islands in Lake Superior, which is the most pristine lake. So no area is really untouched by what we're seeing. Another example that I write about a lot is Asian carp, bighead and silver carp, which are thankfully not in the Great Lakes themselves, but you can see why fishery managers and wildlife managers are having such a hard time when you can see what they're capable of. you know, as they're like, you know, they were accidentally introduced into the Mississippi basin. They've been charging upstream, and now they're in the Illinois River. But I mean, when you think that, you know, this fish can lay over 1 million, one fish can lay over 1 million eggs each year. They can eat 120% of their body weight a day in microscopic plankton, starving out other fish while becoming as big as 100 pounds themselves. And to think that, you know, once they get that big, there's no other predator in the water that can eat them. I mean, that really right there, for the average everyday person, you know, relays the importance of this. But it's important to have that context. And like I said, being someone who didn't necessarily have that science background, it's important for me because I'm learning alongside the reader a lot of times and doing this. So just one more thing before I turned it over to you guys. I get asked all the time, and you know, well, how, you know, just given this climate, not actual climate, but the political climate, how do you try and like speak to people, you know, who might not, who might be skeptical of climate change and things like that? And I think it's now more than ever, it's just really, really important to convey to your audience that they can trust you. You vet your sources. You look at where are you getting your information from, and drilling that into folks in terms of, I got this from the National Climate Assessment, which is something that is vetted by 13 government agencies. So if one person says that they don't believe that against 13 government agencies that we pour millions of dollars in, that puts things in context. So attribution is key. In terms of scientific papers, we always try and check to see that it's peer reviewed. You examine the funding source to see if it's an independent organization, to like, you know, an objective organization, a reputable organization, rather than like a lobbying group that might, you know, they might fund something that they want to see an outcome of. You look at the citations to see, you know, how widely accepted is this? Are other scientists co-signing this? And at the end of the day, well, before I guess I say that, also looking at data sets and how long of a record do we have on this? And we thankfully have such a great resource in that we have like 150 years worth of temperature records, 100 years of water level records with the Great Lakes, and 40 years worth of ice records, ice cover records with the Great Lakes as well. So when you kind of put things in perspective, to say this is the first time in 100 years that this has happened, then you kind of, that makes your audience step back and say, wow, okay, this is exceptional. And to, you know, you can trust this information, that this is something that's not just a blip or something that we haven't been measuring for a long time. So, you know, I take comfort in that. But at the end of the day, it kind of is like, you know, I go back to what I say in the first piece right here, which is, you know, people can quibble with, you know, facts and figures, but you really can't argue with a story, which is why it's important to talk to the fishermen, you know, the everyday people who are out there who can just anecdotally say, I've been out here every day for 30 some years, or however many, I'm third generation X, Y, or Z. And, you know, it just, it's way more poignant, you know, to say, in addition to Illinois has risen 1.2 degrees in a century, to tell people that, well, there are armadillos downstate. Like, I mean, that really just kind of drives it home to say, you know, that is objectively, you know, strange. So with that, I would love, you know, if you guys would reach out to me with any questions, comments. I would love for you guys to send me any story ideas that you guys have. This is certainly something that I plan to resume as I, you know, do environmental work through ProPublica Illinois. So please do reach out to me.
Great, thank you so much, Tony. We have a couple of questions coming in. Our first question is about zebra mussels. What is the impact of zebra mussels on the Great Lakes? What can be done to manage the problem? That question is from Larry. Thank you.
That is a tough question. I don't think that out of all the species that we've seen in the Great Lakes, I think that they are the most problematic. Well, and even so, I mean, it's like quagga mussels and zebra mussels kind of go tandem. Zebra mussels, I mean, have actually been kind of replaced by quagga mussels, which is a little bit problematic because quagga mussels can survive at bigger depths. So essentially, you have like trillions of, like hundreds of trillions of these covering the lakes. And once they have a foothold, I don't think that we've had a good way to remove them. And just to give you an idea, when it comes to Lake Michigan, for example, they can filter. There's so many in the lake. They can filter it in 4 to 6 days. Like they can filter the entire volume of the lake in that time period. So I think that, and in doing so, what they're filtering is the plankton that the fish depend upon. So they are a tremendous, detrimental species to being here. I know that they are looking at certain ways to kind of kill it off. I know that Michigan Tech is actually looking at different ways where they're scraping them off manually and seeing how long it takes to grow back. But I think that that's something that we're continuing to look at. I think a lot of people are wondering, is this something that the Great Lakes will simply have to live with going forward, just given how much they've spread across Lake Michigan and Huron. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, Lake Huron used to be, Lake Superior used to be the clearest lake. And Lake Michigan and Huron have leapfrogged that because of how much these mussels have filtered out the plankton that used to exist there. I don't know if we've had an answer to that, but I think that we just continue to follow the work of the scientists.
Great, thank you. I have a really exciting question from Leah. In many parts of the world, there's a strong intersection of gender and water. Does this, or how does this manifest itself in the Great Lakes region? Does it manifest itself in the Great Lakes region, and how?
It's really interesting because, when I went to visit Manitoulin Island, I learned so much from the First Nations people. And the chief of the Wiki people told me that, the women are seen in the culture as the caretakers of water. And so it was really incredible to see and to talk to the women there about their movement and their activism to raise awareness about what a resource the Great Lakes are. And so I think amplifying this voice and this platform to say that these are our lakes, this is our resource, and we should be protecting them is something that we should have been listening to a long time ago. But the fact that paying attention to those voices is why I got into journalism in the first place. And so it was really an honor to be able to give them a platform and to amplify that message. So I do agree that women play a considerable role, and they should be getting more of a portion in terms of the voices that are being looked at. I mean, even when you look at the story that I did in Lake Superior, it was great to have the voice of a woman ice who ice fishes. She moved from Lake Superior because Lake Superior and Lake Michigan, because the ice was so measly that she moved to to one of the Dakotas to be able to continue that tradition. So we need to start expanding the way that we think about gender and outdoorsmanships and conservation and all these different areas. So thank you for that question.
Yeah. This question is from Larry. Is damage to wetlands from the rise of lake levels having an impact on carbon release from wetlands?
That is a great question, and something that I've actually followed with great intrigue, from my early days of just covering beach erosion, was how much of the wetlands, out of all the different habitat that we have, whether it's forest and all that kind of stuff, they absorb the most amount of, carbon dioxide of any other kind of environment. And so looking, in ocean coast to see how they're being eroded with sea level rise, and then also what's being done in terms of lake fluctuation, not only like with drought, when you have water go down, a lot of that wetland is replaced by forest and things that don't absorb as much carbon, but when it's high, it erodes away at it. And then also development, just human activity and development replaces and has swapped out a lot of that historically as well. And so when you have that erosion happen, it does make that habitat more of a source of carbon than a sink, because you have to think that once all that soil is churned up, it becomes a release. I think that there are some scientists also at Michigan Tech who have been trying to quantify that, to look at in a grander scheme, are the Great Lakes a source or a sink of carbon? Because you also have to think about phytoplankton. Phytoplankton and algae, you know, on a global scale, they absorb, I want to say, they provide 50% of the oxygen, but they provide a big sink also of because they're vegetation. I mean, cyanobacteria and algae use photosynthesis, and once they die, they fall to the bottom of the lake and they store carbon as well. So looking at these wetlands in addition to the plankton is a really big thing in the whole carbon budget, and something that we should be looking forward to examining on a grander scale.
Great, thank you. This question is from Janie. She's asking about plastics entering the Great Lakes. Can you discuss that a little bit for us?
You know, I've covered a lot of, you know, kind of scary stories, if you will, in the Great Lakes. And I think that like the plastics issue was something that I really had no familiarity with, and might be the one that scares me the most. To think that, you know, I was thinking when, you know, you have like a plastic bag or a plastic bottle, and I think a lot of people might think, you know, it's just something that, you know, it's out there, somebody will eventually have to scoop it up, or it just remains as a piece of litter. But no, the longer that this litter is in there, the further it degrades and breaks down with sunlight and with waves and like abrasion. And so that's what contributes to, in addition to all the stuff that goes, you know, down our sinks and everything that might have microplastics in it. These larger macroplastic like bottles and things like that break down into microplastics. And, you know, I always strive to ask the question of, well, what's next after that?
Mm-hmm.
And the scary thing is microplastics break down into even smaller particles known as nanoplastics. And I think that that's a leading edge of research to see, you know, these are plastics that are so small that they could breach cell membranes. So something that can potentially end up in our blood cells, brain cells. Scientists aren't necessarily sure even what the full health consequences of microplastics are. So nanoplastics are something that, you know, I don't know how you get something that's small enough to remove them, but it's something that scientists are looking into, and I think that we'll have to learn about as, you know, a number of, I mean, I forget the amount of sheer weight that goes into the Great Lakes every year, but it's a considerable amount of, you know, plastic that goes into the Great Lakes each year. And so it's good to see that there are certain organizations that are leading beach cleanups and things like that to prevent or mitigate the amount that is actually going in, because that's a huge problem.
Speaking of the future, Stephanie asks, is there a plan if Asian carp do get into the lakes?
I have not seen one. If there is, I have not seen it, because it's really scary to think that, you know, if they end up getting past Brandon Road Lock and Dam in the Illinois River, which, you know, from there they would go to the Chicago River and into Lake Michigan. That's kind of like that's the bottle. You know, that's the cork right there. And if that, you know, once you I guess breach that, it's kind of home free. I mean, there are a number of tributaries in Lake Michigan from which Asian carp can go. I mean, they need rivers and tributaries to spawn. So that's probably where they will be headed. Some wonder if they will be able to survive because of how much the zebra and quagga mussels have decimated their food source, because they both feed on plankton. But there are areas like Green Bay and Saginaw Bay and areas like that, to where if they can survive and make it there, that they would be able to actually thrive. You know, if they actually do get in, I'm not sure if there's a plan to eradicate them from that, but it's interesting to look at grass carp, which is one of the lesser talked about, you know, species of Asian carp in the Toledo area. They have yet to say whether or not they are an established species, but they are breeding in the Toledo area. They have strike teams over there that are, you know, they actually release Asian carp with chips in them, and they try and see if they can find larger groups by microchipping these quote unquote Judas fish, and rounding them all up because they all school together. So we'll see if they can exterminate them through that means, or if that's going to be something that's a larger issue in Lake Erie. But I'm not necessarily sure if how that would work in a large lake like Michigan. So.
Great. Tony, we have so many really great
Sorry.
questions. I'm having a hard time choosing the ones to
No.
respond to. I think we have time for two. This question is from Lynn. What would be your priorities list for industry practices that need to change? Which companies and cities are doing better in significant ways? And what are most important regulations that governments should create or enforce? And can these issues be successfully depoliticized? Thank you for your question, Lynn.
Ooh, that is a very tough one, in terms of what should be prioritized, because there are so many pressing issues, in the Great Lakes. I would say that the one that is probably most pressing to me, just from what I've seen, is how we deal with algae blooms. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I think that everybody can agree that people deserve to have the right to clean water, and so could the state of Ohio and the U.S. Change farming practices to where less manure and fertilizer is ending up in waterways that are contributing to these huge blooms? It is a very highly politicized, issue. I don't think that farmers are intentionally doing this. I mean, and that's why we went out to a farm ourselves to talk to them, just because, I mean, you don't want to lose that manure off of your fields. I mean, that's many farmers actually who don't have their own manure from livestock pay for that, and that's what grows their crops. But at the same time, there's this suggestion from scientists that maybe we're using too much. Can we reel that back? And so I would say that's something that's feasible, that can be done through legislation, and best practices that would help the Toledo area and maybe other areas very significantly.
Great, thank you. We have a number of other questions. What I'm going to try to do for all the attendees here that didn't get their questions answered, I'm going to work with Tony to respond to some of them via a follow-up email. We are near the end of Tony's presentation. I have a couple more things to share with you, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Tony. So please join me in the chat box and thank him so much for his wonderful presentation.
Thank you guys for having me.
So I'm going to share a little bit more information about this project and its connection to an initiative of ours. So you can read the entirety of Tony's incredible reporting project, Great Lakes and High Stakes, on our website, as well as our Connected Coastlines website. Connected Coastlines is a nationwide climate reporting initiative. The initiative is building a consortium of newsrooms and independent journalists across America to report on local effects of erratic weather patterns on coastal populations using the latest climate science. If this is a topic that is interesting to you or you feel would be interesting for your students, I highly encourage you to visit this website. I think this map would be an incredible interactive tool that could really help engage students in this topic. If environmental and climate change and environmental science is something that is really interesting to you and your students, we have a number of webinars coming up. On September 22nd, we will be investigating power and environmental crises. And then on the 29th, we have two back-to-back webinars exploring climate change and its effect on different populations and communities. If you're interested in registering for any of these events, come visit us at pulsarcenter.org/events to register. I want to take an opportunity to thank you so much for your participation in attending this webinar. For many of you at the very end of your day, so hats off to all of you. We would love to stay connected with you. We would love to hear your feedback. You can provide that feedback for us with a brief survey, and we always welcome you to email us at education@pulsarcenter.org. If you are not connected to our newsletter, you can always subscribe to that at the link below. Thank you so much again for your time and your participation, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you.